Our theme for this month in April is the physiology of spirituality. And today's topic, as Kim just mentioned to the audience, is the power of the human consciousness. Last week I shared with you the definition of the word physiology as I'm using it in this series of talks. So I'd like to reiterate that now for those of you who weren't here or those of you who were and would like a refresher on that. Physiology is the way in which a living organism or bodily part functions. Physiology is dealing with the functions and activities of living organisms and their parts, including all physical and chemical processes. And physiology means the science of the normal function of living things, the study of normal mechanisms and their interactions which work within a living system. And I also would like to restate that as I began to gather material for this series, I first went to my own library and I began to pull books off the shelf, as you heard me say last week. And before I knew it, I had 17 books on the table to use as reference materials. And that didn't even include the Science of Mind text or any of the other books by Ernest Holmes. And that wasn't because they don't include it, because they do, but rather because there is such a body of knowledge growing now in that regard of the parallels between what we call physical science and what we call spiritual laws and science. So, and to bring out in these talks how widespread this concept is now in metaphysics. Remember the word meta from last week means after or beyond. And it's a prefix used in the English language to indicate a concept which is an abstraction, first of all, but it's behind another concept used to complete or add to the latter. So henceforth, meta preceding physical. So meta completes, adds to, or goes beyond the physical. That means I am full of mind, that's a small m, mind, universal connection. I am full of mind, and I am full of mind with a capital M, which represents that eternal creative energy, which I call God, which you may call your source of being, your divine intelligence connection, your recognition of creative energy. There are a lot of different phrases. They all represent that coalition of coming together as one. So another way of saying that, and those of you who know me know that I do that on a regular basis, have another way of saying something. Another way of saying that is that universal mind is in every cell, every organ, every system of this magnificent thing we call our body. And that this is a concept now recognized not only by metaphysicians, but by an increasing number of scientists, medical doctors, practitioners, psychologists, psychiatrists, and so on down the line. Even biologists, as I found out twice this past week, and I'll share that with you in a minute. So now let's address the power of the human consciousness. What do I mean when I say that? The consciousness of the human being. For the time we are present on this planet we call Earth, we're housed in what we call our body. There are many different expressions of that, aren't there? As many as there are people presently walking the earth, there are that many physical expressions. So, it's an incredible complex, self-actuated piece of the energy of the universe, that each of us is that. We are incredible, we are complex, we are self-actuated individually, but we are all part of what goes together to make up the universe. We're powerful but compact. We're active, but to a large degree, much of that is without a whole lot of conscious attention on our part. Now, what do I mean by that? Most of the functions of the body are going on whether you're paying attention to them or not, aren't they? Because if they weren't, and you weren't, then they wouldn't. But they do. So thinking about that, without any conscious attention on ourselves, and yet I'm talking about the power of the consciousness of the human. Well, many of us spend very little time acknowledging these magnificent functions until or unless they stop or call our attention to them. And we have words for that. We call them injuries. We call them illnesses. And a whole other long list that I won't go into. And typically, when that happens, we look for someone or something else to fix it. Infrequently, we look for the cause of the malfunction, but not often. More frequently, we just want it to go away, or at least fit in to the life we've chosen. It's there's an expression for that. It's called arguing for our limitations. We begin to accept that, oh, well, this is just the way it is. And in that moment, that's true. And in today's world, there are many helpful ways for us to be accommodated in this regard, which I believe is a wonderful way to alleviate our discomfort while we embark on the path of healing. I was having a heated discussion a couple nights ago with a biologist who was also a teacher of that subject for many years. And seemingly, our discussion was from two different worlds. We were definitely talking from the far end of the continuum about this subject. But suddenly, we came to agreement upon repeated questioning as to the source of all these biological functions. God. And that was the biologist's word, not mine. I was like, okay. Sort of like when all else fails and I can't explain it anymore, then I default to God. So fascinating. And I thought to myself, that's the power of the human consciousness. It knows that there is something more, something greater, something unfailingly complete in this thing called life. Some of us even know what it is, don't we? Because we're practicing it, we're living it, we're expressing it, and we are being examples of it. That came up this morning in some of the Standing in the Light, as a matter of fact, didn't it? Well, no coincidence there. Anyway, when I got home after this discussion, I looked at those 17 books on the table, beckoning me to further explore the physiology of spirituality from some more directions. Dr. Bernie Siegel, which is a name I've mentioned to you before, is a retired pediatric surgeon, and he's written a dozen books on the subject of this, the power of the human consciousness. He's also made recordings, he's made films, he has an incredible offering to the world. where the power of the human consciousness to heal is concerned. He's been described by Dr. Larry Dawsey, who is also a medical doctor working in the field of metaphysics. And Dawsey describes Bernie Siegel as a brilliant beacon broadcasting a message of hope, of knowing, of success in healing. Siegel, Larry writes, supplements high-tech medicine with love and compassion, and the result is not just curing, but healing. So you see, this is something we talk about in metaphysics, the difference between curing and healing. Now we're hearing it from the medical side of the IO. Not just curing, but healing. When we talk about curing in this case, we're talking about alleviating the symptoms. We do that in a variety of ways. We do it with therapy, we do it with medication, we do it with surgery, and so on the list goes. And that alleviates the symptoms. Healing, on the other hand, is going to the source that created it to begin with, and that's not physical. That's in mind. Remember when we talk about cause and effect? Cause and effect. And that's what this is about. And these individuals who are working collectively through the treatment processes that alleviate the symptoms are also aware that there's more to it than that, because we are a cohesive unit, body, mind, and spirit. There's precious little more valuable, than recognition by your peers. And Siegel certainly has had that, not only from Larry Dawsey, but from countless other experts in this field. His book, Prescriptions for Living, is worth a look on the way to healing any condition you choose to. One of his prescriptions is, I'm quoting, receive and give liberal doses daily of faith, hope, peace, and love. We call that an affirmation, don't we? How easy that is. Receive and give liberal doses of faith, hope, peace, and love. Larry Dawsey calls those healing words in a book he wrote of that very name, Healing Words. Well, and let's not forget the grande dame of metaphysical healing practices, Louise Hay. Many of you are familiar with Dr. Louise, and she was a Science of Mind minister who not only offered over a dozen books of her own on healing, she also began a publishing and distribution company, Hay House, for metaphysical authors and lecturers. Many of you perhaps have participated in her online webinars in recent years, and people throughout the world have been served by her works translated into 23 different languages in 30 countries worldwide. In 1984, she published her first book, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, titled You Can Heal Your Life. And this is a down-to-earth, easy-to-read series of ideas on doing just that, healing your life. Personally, I frequently use it as a reference because it stimulates my thinking on my own healing practices as well as supporting others in theirs. It's not something that says, it is this and you must do that. Rather, it says, perhaps it's this. How do you deal with that? This is how I would deal with it. How do you deal with it? So it gives us the opportunity to make it personal and usable in our own individual lives. So let's talk about healing practices for a few minutes. Ernest Holmes, among his 40-plus books, on the science of mind, wrote one titled The Practical Application of Science of Mind. It's a little one. Look at there. Didn't know he could be that succinct, did you? And this is another one of those books that he wrote with William Kinnear. So we thank Kinnear for having structure to get these ideas into something like this. You can slip into your purse or your backpack, or lay on the passenger seat of the car when you're going somewhere, and when you get stopped in traffic, or when you're waiting for somebody for an appointment, you have this to read. And in this book, there is a chapter titled, How's Your Health? So I'm going to read verbatim to you the first and second paragraphs in that particular chapter, because I want to be sure that I give you Dr. Holmes' words exactly as he wrote them. So here's what he says. Many people who can answer all the questions asked about the mechanics of healing through spiritual mind treatment fail to receive help because they're unwilling to pay the price. This price often involves the giving up of some weakness, a negative pet emotional mood, or patterns of thinking, and the cultivating of an opposite and positive attitude. He was kind there with those words, wasn't he? Yes. So then he goes on to say in the second paragraph, it stands to reason if certain mental attitudes have produced certain conditions, then a continuation of those attitudes will perpetuate such conditions. There must always be soul searching to find whether or not we are living in accord with universal good. One thing is certain, it cannot fool the universe. This is what true spiritual understanding does for the individual. It sets him or her back on the right track, always pointing to the great reality which harmoniously governs everything. I want you to know that this book is still in publication. It has a much more modern cover on it. You can get it online. It's this one cost $1.50. It doesn't cost $1.50 anymore. The price. The Practical Application of Science of Mind. And it's worth the increase in price. If for no other reason, then it's such a pretty new cover. But it is available, and if you don't want to go online and order it, we can order them for you from Divorce Publishing. So actually, I could read that whole chapter to you. When you read it yourself, though, it's really more powerful. And because you can apply it to your own individual situation. Holmes was very clear that healing comes from unity, from our recognition and practice that each one of us is one with the one, capital O, the one universal creative energy, whatever you call it. Healing follows in such degree that we recognize our oneness with that creative energy, which after all was the originating creation called you. And that we realize that we are gifted with choice as to how we use that. See, and now it's not even January anymore, and I'm starting to refer back to page 52, yeah? But it's so powerful that recognizing that it's available, accessing it, and knowing that you deserve to use it is all that it's about. So I'm reiterating the basics of our teaching. It's done unto us as we believe. Positive, negative, or no action at all. This is the power of the human consciousness. unity with my creative source, and for me, that's God. For you, there may be another preference, such as divine intelligence, creative energy, universal action, spirit. Remember, the name per se is immaterial, and so is spirit. The name makes no difference where creative energy is concerned, because it's not a person, big or small. It's not a personality with mood swings or a voicemail. It's not judging and criticizing our every move. That's no longer reality in spirituality. We know instead that this is a concept, this is an energy, this is a limitless creative process, and that it creates us out of itself, not to bash us, but to serve us on our eternal path in consciousness. Did I say serve us? You bet I did. And if that's a new concept for you, you're to be congratulated on your awakening. Your courage and your willingness to step into your own power as a unique and marvelous creation of the source of your being. And to know that God supports you in that, acts on your behalf, and returns to you that which you have stated as your intention. And this not only works for physical healing, folks, it works equally well for emotional and mental challenges, financial prosperity, creative growth, expansion, and success, and for personal relationships. You get to choose for yourself, as long as it's at no one else's expense. And because we are active partners with divine intelligence, we recognize that anybody, anywhere, at any time, can also be that when and if he or she chooses. This is not an elitist clique that we belong to, folks. We don't claim sole ownership of this philosophy. We don't ignore medical intervention on the way to healing. Quite the contrary. We know the highest and best for all spiritual beings having a human experience peacefully, prosperously, and healthfully. And as I mentioned last week, we are so blessed to be standing on the shoulders of those who preceded us with the courage and the knowledge to bring forth these principles for us to consider, to practice, and to share. It's really clear to me, the more I work in this material, that there is so much to think about and so much to talk about. This physiology of spirituality, that perhaps the first Sunday in May, which would be May 6th, we might do a question and answer service instead of a prepared talk, so that you can ask your own questions and about these topics, or how it's sounding to you and how to deal with it. And we're starting a new class on April 24th, as I announced last week. It's titled Building a Healing Consciousness. Whew. No coincidence there that follows these talks. This is going to be an 8-week class. It's accredited by our International Centers for Spiritual Living. It's going to be held at Tutu's house in Waimea from 3 to 6 p.m. on Tuesdays. So it's the continuation of the beginning of classes in Waimea. It's just that we're going to give Tina a rest from having to redo her house every week and meet in the blue, what's called the Blue Room at Tutu's house for a while. So you might consider this class the logical next step to what you have been hearing so far this month and will continue to on the power of the human consciousness, to living a healthy, joyful, prosperous, creative life. And so it is.